I watched a rowdy press conference today, as many of you probably did as well, where New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian was slammed for everything from not getting into lockdown early enough to not going hard enough on retail, even closing that sector down completely, they were calling for her to do. Maybe it's time for a few people just to take a chill pill and put things into perspective. Because let's not forget, during times of lockdown, how devastating it is to lives and livelihoods. Remember that? And the more we lock down, the more you'll hear psychologists point to a compound element to the impact of that dramatic measure on someone's mental health. And you know what takes someone to get to the edge in that lockdown? The closure of their business, shutting their doors. So ease up on that kind of pressure. Government handouts only patch up the nightmare of having no customers. We learnt today that in New South Wales, which is in the middle of a 5-week lockdown and maybe more, the state recorded the loss of more than 2,000 businesses this past financial year. Now, you extrapolate how many owners, how many families are crushed from that one statistic. Way more than 2,000. That's the other pandemic. It is real, and often it is just as heartbreaking and deadly. And it's why a government like New South Wales cannot shut every shop door and supermarket and are relying on businesses to just be COVID safe.
We know that those organisations that are continuing work are doing so in a COVID safe way. But what is really important is to make sure that when we highlight work sites where there is evidence of transmission, that people sit up and notice. Employers and employees have responsibilities. Every citizen in this state has a responsibility.
I know Alan, for one, is against the current lockdown in New South Wales, and you've heard his reasoning behind that. But it is an unprecedented balancing act. There is no guidebook on how to behave or how to act and what decisions and restrictions to put in place. And it will always attract criticism, especially when caseloads increase. It raises fears, it raises tension. And even the Premier admitted today for the first time that her own COVID settings are not always perfect.
I'm not pretending this is easy. I'm not pretending that there's perfection in the settings. There never will be, no matter where you draw the line. But what I do know is that the green shoots are starting to show. We've still got a way to go.
That is also true. The last 3 days in New South Wales has seen green shoots. Compliance is beginning to influence infection rates. As the testing numbers have increased in the past 3 days, the number of infections and those who've been infected and circulating within the community have plateaued.
The data's starting to come through. We're so deeply grateful for that. We're deeply grateful for the high testing numbers. But there is no perfection in a pandemic. What we do know is there is some stabilisation, but as Dr. Chant has told us repeatedly, there is still the risk of this thing taking off if we don't stay the course.
So, 65 cases reported today, 28 circulating in the community, which is not good, and 19 in intensive care. But they are roughly static figures when you look at the testing numbers. That will lead to a drop in numbers by the start of next week at the very least. This is the learned opinion of microbiologist Professor Peter Collignon, who I'll speak with shortly on the show. Now, as for Melbourne, well, they've seen the transmission of the Delta variant in a stadium setting at the MCG. Now, before people say, see, it does travel outdoors. Well, hang on, that may not be the case. It could have been at a food or drink outlet indoor setting. So as yet, there's no proof on that. But they have seen a new infection transmitted to a Tier 2 contact. Now, there are 2,000 close by Tier 1 contacts. So this Tier 2 contact is someone that probably should not have been infected. So how did it happen? Somewhere in that member's stand. Now, that's a worry, but they still only have 18 infections all up. But the Victorian Premier did what he's done so quickly on 4 previous occasions and locked the joint down. The entire state for at least 5 days.
Hard and fast, you only get one chance. Now is our time. This is the time to do this. That's the advice that's been provided to me, and that's the decisions that I have made.
Well, it came not as a shock because it was telegraphed for most of the day. 18 cases and you go into lockdown. Now, even the Prime Minister seemed, well, rather supportive of Chairman Dan's blunt method of handling small outbreaks.
They really should be a last resort. They should be a last resort. But sometimes with the Delta variant, you come to that position a lot more quickly than you used to. I think Australians understand that dealing with COVID-19 doesn't come with a rule book. And as much as we'd like the certainty that affects so many other areas of things that we have to deal with, that doesn't apply with this. Every single country, every single state and territory is wrestling with what is a very fluid situation. That's why we keep meeting together. That's why we keep working together. That's why we keep upgrading and updating what we're doing. And where it can be improved, and I'm announcing some improvements that I'll take to National Cabinet tomorrow, then good.
I'm sorry, but the Prime Minister has been way too soft on Daniel Andrews. 18 cases. Now, what should also please the Victorian chairman, despite all the whinging about New South Wales being given preferential treatment, is that Scott Morrison today improved and refined the disaster and business payment model. So, if, God forbid, Victoria moves into a second week of lockdown, the state will qualify for payments being given to New South Wales now, which were given to them from week 3. But they'll be given to states and territories now from week 2. But Dan Andrews is still whinging. He wants those improved handouts on day 1.
At every point, they have said their packages of support, their measures, their policies, their plans are based on need. Well, there is need in Victoria from 11:59 p.m. tonight.
Always never enough. But if the Prime Minister does capitulate tonight and puts more onus on all other taxpayers, it just makes the move to lockdown a whole lot easier next time, time after that, and the time after that. You cannot incentivise lockdowns. Whatever every Premier in Australia needs to take into account as they decide either when to lift restrictions or call another lockdown, is that the circumstances in July 2021 are so very different. Close to 75% of the most vulnerable have received their vaccinations. The horrific elderly death toll we saw last year in Victoria cannot occur. What's also different? The vaccination number, well, in New South Wales alone, it's almost at 3 million in a state of 8 million. And so there are 3 million people who won't show any symptoms even if they do or are infected by COVID. That's important. And yesterday there were 162,000 doses put in arms. That's more than 1 million per week now. That's the rate and ratio we've got up to. Hotel quarantine protocols have never been tougher. And there's a second pandemic running parallel to the virus they need to keep into consideration as well. Lives and livelihoods are being lost. Now, the one huge consolation with these outbreaks and all the drama that go along with them, a lot more Australians are getting out and getting jabbed. The faster that happens, for mine, the better we'll all be.